In the late 1930s, a radio drama debuted, and the invisible avenger known as the Shadow was born. Any of you remember? Yeah.
Another Shadow.
In the introduction to the program, the narrator intones, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men." I always like that part. In the hearts of men, the Shadow knows. And the Shadow did seem to know. Over the next 6 or 7 decades, he fought evil around the world with a single-minded purpose, showing up in radio and comics and finally in a full-length motion picture, always reminding us that there is a dark side of the soul, a dark side buried deep beneath even the most placid exterior. Psychologist Carroll was one of the first to talk about that shadow side of the psyche, and he described the dimension as the sum of all of our unpleasant qualities hidden from day-to-day scrutiny. That pretty much sums it up. It's all of our unpleasant qualities hidden from day-to-day scrutiny. Robert Louis Stevenson's character, Dr. Jekyll, and with his Mr. Hyde persona, is one of the best-known examples of the dual aspects of the personality that Jung wrote about. For each of us, it seems, there exists a more pleasant Dr. Jekyll for daytime wear, and a nighttime Mr. Hyde self that stays quiet most of the time. As one author puts it, the daytime self is our New Year's resolution self. You know, it's that self that we wish we were, the self that we try diligently to be, the self we hope all of the world imagines us to be. Our shadow side, our Mr. Hyde self, is that part that we deny or neglect. That part of ourself that we reject or repress in order to hold on to a self-constructed image that focuses on our gifts and our talents, our good stuff. It allows our negative emotions and behaviors such as rage or jealousy or shame or lying or resentment or greed to stay hidden just below the surface. Yet, however well separated and hidden both our Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde self are parts of that same whole. We live in a world of duality, with the contrast of dark and light and up and down and on and off and body and soul. One Buddhist teacher noted that if truth doesn't contain paradox, it probably isn't true. You know, and that kind of talk leads to an ambiguity that we rational, logical folks often find difficult to tolerate. How can we be both good and bad at the same time? How can we be both conscious and unconscious of our behaviors and our thoughts? How can we love and hate seemingly simultaneously? It's far more common to choose one side and reject the other, to ignore that stuff that makes us feel uncomfortable, to pretend that the baser qualities don't exist within, even though you can rest assured they exist in the rest of the people in the world. And our 21st century culture teaches us to dislike those nasty shadow parts, to work hard at keeping the Mr. Hyde self contained and out of sight. It encourages us to see evil motives and wicked intentions and overbearing agendas in other people, to project them onto others and to maintain the illusion that those tacky and sometimes destructive qualities aren't ours, that they belong to the other. Wouldn't it simplify things if denial really worked? Then every time life pointed to one of those ouch places of the personality, we could just pretend it away. Poet Robert Bly talks about how we stuff our less appealing qualities into a metaphorical bag. A bag that we then drag behind ourselves, watching it grow longer and longer. And according to Bly, we spend the first part of our lives stuffing that bag, and then the rest of our lives trying to unpack them. Trying to reintegrate into ourselves the stuff we've dragged around for so very long. This shadow is like an old pair of shoes, well worn but comfortable, apparently serviceable but clearly full of holes and in need of repair. As Carroll described in this morning's reading, everyone carries a shadow. And the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. You know, even though it may seem to make sense to focus on the generous and the peaceful and the accepting side, we never truly love. We never truly develop strong, integrated selves unless we look at the whole of who we are. And we often stand in our own way. It is not uncommon for the psyche to imagine a dream fulfilled or a success achieved, and then to throw all sorts of roadblocks in the way so we can't possibly attain it. What are we hiding from when we're lost in a rush of activity that keeps us too busy to be? What sore spot is touched when we snap back with some sarcastic barb? How confused must we be to numb out with food or TV or computers or exercise? Actions of the individual shadow are multiplied in our institution and in our government and in our social norms. The shadow is a large part of our collective conscience. Over the last decade, I've become more aware of the nation's collective shadow. This recent spate of anti-immigration legislation capitalizes on a fear of folks not like us, or at least folks projected to be not like us. In state after state, those on the bottom of the economic or race or gender ladder are targeted. And as one writer quipped, it almost feels like Godzilla himself has arisen in an insatiable gotham of human rights. The shadow overpowers humanitarian perspectives with little regard for the common good. The fear and anguish of 9/11 encouraged us as a country to look at other people around the world and attribute to them traits we have a difficult time acknowledging in ourselves. As a country, we struggle to balance between our responsibility to developing nations across the globe and our desire to be the biggest and the best. Dwight Eisenhower once commented that a people that values its privileges above its principles soon loses both. It is our shadow side that chooses privilege over principle. And where's the institution of the church in all of this? Martin Luther King observed that the contemporary church is often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. And he went on to say, far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's silent and often vocal sanction of things as they are. Wow, that's an indictment. Not much has changed in the decades since King made that observation. We youths are accustomed to a place, if not at the head, at least in the heart of social change. Yet all too often, our churches find themselves uninformed or ill-prepared to speak or act. When the church, any church, slips into that silent and vocal sanction of things as they are, then it has fallen deep within the reach of the shadow self. As youths, we are particularly vulnerable to some fairly distinctive shadow traits. We tend to behave as though youths are innocent of the arrogance and the moral superiority we find so common in other faith communities. Our UU shadow bag is stuffed with unexamined allegiance to self-reliance and diversity, to the intellect, and to our glorious past. As a faith tradition, we are all too comfortable relying on the way we've always done things and on the ability of one or two to get things done, on the power of the intellect at the expense of experience. Out of the shadow of our Christian past, we've inherited a general suspicion of authority. Consider our ambivalence toward the Unitarian Universalist Association and district influence, or our love-hate relationship with clergy. There's a general reluctance to talk about the things we heard in the churches of our past. You know, if they talk about money, then we shouldn't. If they extol the virtues of tithing, we hesitate to ask for anything. If they go on and on about salvation or evangelism or God, we should avoid those topics. Even though we know you youths have much to learn and much to share about money and salvation and evangelism and even about the concept of God. How much simpler it would be to just ignore the whole mess, even when ignoring the shadow self gets us into trouble. And psychology and experience are clear. Whatever it takes to recognize and deal with our shadow parts is worth the effort. Whatever it takes to figure out what's hiding deep in our hearts and minds is worth the hard work. It's worth confronting old demons and less frightening impulses in order to put them to rest. In the individual, an unaddressed shadow side often leads to depression, outbursts of anger and violence, even physical illness. In the marketplace and in the neighborhood, and even in our beloved community of the church, an unaddressed shadow leads to stalemate, to hours of debate without resolution, and to difference without compromise. The very behaviors that become stumbling blocks to our spiritual and emotional growth. So what happens when we shine a light in the dark corners of ourselves and really take a look at the shadows? Like scary shapes in a child's bedroom, they often shrink and sometimes disappear, and sometimes those shadows even transform into something far more complicated. The paradox is that when we sit with the shadow side, we're likely to find there much worth developing. Even the darkest shadow traits have an honorable side. You know, that's the problem with filling and dragging around a bag full of our less appealing qualities. There's almost always stuff in there that isn't bad. Remember that bag holds all the things left unexplored, including hidden potential and unused gifts. As we grow and mature as individuals and as a congregation, the task is to unpack those long bags, to acknowledge that what is in them is really part of our whole self, to acknowledge and to accept the shadow side of what it means to be us. Each shadow brought into the light and made part of the daytime selves draws us closer to wholeness, allows us to clarify who we are, to listen to the wisdom of our deeper self, still small voice. This interim year is a classic opportunity to diligently watch for situations when the shadow emotion or desire rises up to the surface. It's a time for paying attention to the intentions beneath the actions. A time for recognizing the fine line between the shadow and light. This is the time to transform the part that surfaces the shadow into a helping hand that's in service to the congregation. Trying to grow spiritually while not dealing with the shadow is like trying to walk through a dark room filled with objects. You know, chances are the experience will just be frustrating and there'll be a whole lot falling down. Then it makes sense to turn on the light and see what the room contains. Then straighten the way so that the path is smoother and less dangerous. I wish I had magic beans that could take away the tough questions and the hard answers that go hand in hand with reintegrating the shadow side. I'd make them available to you in a heartbeat, but I don't. And there is no quick fix. Like most difficult tasks, the work requires rigorous attention. I know that recognizing what sets us off, what pushes our buttons, what gets us all spun up, is the first step in identifying the unhealed places of the heart. And I know that it's important to look at what we hate and what we avoid and what we envy and what we covet, to bring up from the depths the sometimes subtle and petty parts of ourselves so they can be transformed. There are ways to work through whatever baggage is being carried from long ago families and new formed lives, from our religious paths and from our personal journeys. In this springtime season of new birth and growth, let's get busy. And let's keep asking tough questions of ourselves, tough questions of our communities and our nation and of this church. That's how we continue to grow and are made whole. Because the shadow knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men and in the hearts of women. Because the shadow is never gone. Author and innovator William Edwards Deming commented that it is not necessary to change. Survival is not mandatory. You have the freedom to choose and the tools and the power to create. What do you choose? What kind of change will you be? What is possible for the Unitarian Church of Hinsdale?